My parents threw a lavish party to surprise my younger sister with a brand new car for her 16th birthday, handing me a cheap bus pass instead. So I called Grandma Lydia, and we orchestrated a trap they never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The rain was coming down in sheets, an unrelenting, freezing downpour that soaked right through my thin canvas jacket. I was 18 years old, running a fever of at least 101, and completely exhausted after finishing an agonizing 10-hour shift. As a freelance graphic designer who also juggled a full course load for my senior year of high school, I was used to being tired. But tonight, the fatigue was bone deep. My chest rattled with a heavy cough, and every step toward my house felt like wading through wet cement. I had called my mother, Gabriella, 3 times from the bus stop, begging for a ride home. The bus schedule had changed without warning, leaving me stranded in the dark for over an hour. On the 3rd call, she had finally answered, her voice dripping with annoyance over a loud, thumping bass line in the background. "Riley, I am incredibly busy right now. We have guests. Just figure it out," she had snapped before abruptly disconnecting the line. So I figured it out. I walked 3 miles in the freezing rain. When I finally turned onto our street, shivering violently, I stopped dead in my tracks. My vision blurred, partly from the rain and partly from sheer disbelief. There, parked squarely in the center of our driveway, was a gleaming, pristine white convertible. It was a luxury model, the kind that cost more than some houses, and strapped to its hood was an oversized, comically large red velvet bow. The headlights were on, illuminating the falling rain, and a small crowd of people stood on our covered porch, cheering and clapping. At the center of the crowd was my younger sister, Aria. She was turning 16 today. She was jumping up and down, squealing at a pitch that pierced right through my pounding headache, clutching a set of shiny new keys. Next to her stood my parents, Gabriella and Jacob, beaming with a level of pride I had never once seen directed at me. I dragged myself up the driveway, my wet sneakers squeaking loudly against the pavement. The moment I stepped under the porch awning, the joyful chatter died down. Gabriella turned to look at me, her manicured eyebrows knitting together in immediate disgust. She was dressed in a tailored silk blouse, looking every bit the successful real estate agent she loved to project to the world. "Riley, look at you. You're dripping wet on the mahogany decking," Gabriella scolded, her voice carrying over the remaining murmurs of the guests. She didn't ask why I was shivering or why my lips were practically blue. "I had to walk," I managed to say, my teeth chattering so hard I could barely form the words. "The bus never came. I told you I was sick." Jacob, my father, stepped forward. He always wore a perpetually exasperated expression whenever he had to deal with me. "Don't ruin your sister's moment with your drama, Riley. Today is about Aria. Look at this beautiful car we got her." "It's perfect, Daddy." Aria shrieked, hugging him tightly before turning her gaze to me. She looked me up and down, taking in my soaked, miserable state. "Maybe if you worked a little harder, you wouldn't have to walk in the rain, Riley." The sheer audacity of her statement left me breathless. I worked 7 days a week. Aria's most strenuous activity was filming dances for her aspiring social media career. But my parents just laughed, nodding in agreement. "Actually," Gabriella said, reaching into the pocket of her slacks with a theatrical sigh, "since we are in a giving mood, and since your 18th birthday was last month." She pulled out a small, rectangular piece of plastic and tossed it toward me. It clattered against the damp wood of the porch. I slowly bent down, my aching joints protesting, and picked it up. It was a city bus pass, not an annual pass, a monthly one. "We loaded 30 days onto it," Jacob said proudly, as if he had just bestowed upon me the greatest gift imaginable. "So you won't have to bother your mother for rides anymore. It's time you learned some independence." I stood there, a cheap piece of plastic in my trembling hand, looking at the $50,000 vehicle sitting in the driveway. The disparity wasn't just unfair, it was violently cruel. I looked at my mother's smug face, my father's dismissive posture, and my sister's mocking smile. In that exact moment, the last lingering thread of familial loyalty I held for them snapped. The betrayal was worse than the chill in my bones. The immediate aftermath of that night was a blur of physical agony and emotional numbness. I managed to retreat to my bedroom without saying another word, locking the door behind me. I peeled off my soaking wet clothes, the fabric clinging stubbornly to my feverish skin, and stepped into a scalding hot shower. The water beat down on my shoulders, but it couldn't wash away the profound sense of isolation that had settled heavily in my chest. For as long as I could remember, I had been an afterthought in my own home. But this was a loud, undeniable declaration of where I stood. After showering, I collapsed into bed, pulling every blanket I owned over my trembling body. My head pounded with a fierce intensity, my throat felt like it was lined with shattered glass, and yet I couldn't sleep. The image of that bright red bow and the mocking plastic bus pass played on a continuous, torturous loop behind my closed eyelids. Around midnight, long after the guests had gone home and the house had fallen quiet, I heard the jiggling of my doorknob. When it didn't open, a sharp knock followed. "Unlock it, Riley," Arya's voice floated through the wood, dripping with that sickeningly sweet tone she used when she wanted to inflict maximum damage. I didn't answer. I just closed my eyes tighter. "I know you're awake," she continued, her voice pressing closer to the door. "I just wanted to make sure you saw the leather interior. Mom and Dad sprang for the upgraded package. They said I deserved the absolute best because I have so much potential. It's a shame you can't say the same." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. "It must really suck," Arya went on, a quiet, cruel laugh escaping her lips. "Knowing they just love me more, knowing they'd rather spend a fortune on me than give you a single dime. You try so hard, Riley. You're always working, always designing, always stressing out. And for what? A piece of plastic for the city bus. Honestly, it's pathetic." Every word was designed to wound, meticulously crafted by a 16-year-old who had never known a day of struggle. I remained perfectly silent, staring at the ceiling in the dark. My hands curled into tight fists beneath the blankets. I let her words wash over me, not with defeat, but with a sudden, crystal-clear realization. Arya, Gabriella, and Jacob believed they held all the cards. They believed my silence was a submission, that my independence was a punishment they were inflicting upon me rather than a shield I had built to survive them. They thought I was weak because I never fought back, because I absorbed their neglect without screaming. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten that while they were busy playing favorites and squandering their resources on maintaining an illusion of wealth, I had been paying attention. I knew their secrets, I knew their financial reality, and most importantly, I had a silent ally they foolishly believed they controlled. "Enjoy the car, Arya," I finally whispered into the dark room, my voice raspy and raw. She couldn't hear me through the door, but it didn't matter. The gears in my mind were already turning, shifting from the passive grief of a neglected daughter to the cold, calculating strategy of someone who was about to rewrite the rules of the game. The favoritism hadn't started with the car. That was simply its grandest manifestation. Looking back, my entire childhood was a masterclass in unequal sacrifices. While Gabriella and Jacob spent their evenings attending high-profile, networking, dinners, and exclusive country club mixers to project an image of immense wealth, I was the one at home raising Arya. By the time I was 12, I was cooking her dinners, helping her with her homework, and ensuring she was bathed and in bed. I missed school dances, field trips, and sleepovers because my parents couldn't be bothered to hire a babysitter. "We rely on you, Riley," Gabriella would say, applying her expensive lipstick in the hallway mirror before rushing out the door. "You're the responsible one. Arya needs you." But that responsibility never translated into reward or even basic respect. When I wanted to take an advanced graphic design course, I was told there was no money in the budget, forcing me to take on freelance commissions at 14 just to pay for my own software and laptop. Meanwhile, Arya's expensive dance lessons, designer clothes, and latest smartphones were always funded without a second thought. Gabriella was the true architect of this dynamic. At 45, She was a real estate agent obsessed with the aesthetics of success. Everything about her was polished, from her immaculately highlighted hair to her practiced, dazzling smile. But behind closed doors, she was deeply disingenuous. She constantly boasted about her sales figures and high commissions to her friends, but I had seen the late notices hidden in the mail. I had heard the hushed, panicked arguments between her and Jacob, a 48-year-old mid-level manager who simply nodded along to whatever reality Gabriella chose to construct. What truly raised my suspicion over the years, however, was Gabriella's disturbing fixation on Grandma Lydia. Grandma Lydia, my mother's mother, was a 72-year-old retired accountant who possessed a sharp mind and an impressive, self-made portfolio. She lived a comfortable, quiet life in a neighboring state, unaware of the daily miseries I endured. Whenever Grandma Lydia visited, Gabriella's behavior transformed entirely. She would become the doting, attentive daughter, constantly steering conversations toward Lydia's estate, her investments, and her will. "You know, Mom," Gabriella would casually drop over dinner during one of Lydia's visits, her eyes gleaming with a predatory focus. "The market is so volatile right now. Jacob and I have such a wonderful financial planner. We could really help you manage your assets so you don't have to worry in your old age." Grandma Lydia would politely decline, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. But Gabriella never stopped trying. She used the generous monthly financial allowances Lydia provided to help with the girls' education to fund her own lavish lifestyle and Arya's endless demands. I hadn't seen a single penny of Grandma Lydia's educational allowance. Gabriella and Jacob had built a house of cards, funded by deception and held together by my forced, unpaid labor. They believed they were untouchable, perfectly insulated in their bubble of arrogance. But as my fever finally broke the morning after the disastrous car reveal, I knew it was time to tear that house down. I picked up my phone, scrolled to Grandma Lydia's contact, and hit dial. It was time she knew exactly where her money was going. The phone rang 3 times before Grandma Lydia answered. The sound of her steady, calm voice, "Hello, Riley, dear, how are you feeling?" nearly broke the dam I had been building inside me all night. I didn't cry, though. I was far past the point of tears. Instead, a cold, hardened resolve settled over my chest. "Grandma, I need to tell you some things," I began, my voice still raspy from the lingering cough, but steady. "And I need you to listen to everything before you say anything back." For the next 45 minutes, I didn't hold anything back. I told her about the exhausting 10-hour shifts at the bakery, the freelance graphic design work I had to take on just to afford my own school supplies, and the constant, suffocating babysitting duties I had been saddled with since I was 12. Then, I told her about the rain. I described the 3-mile walk in the freezing downpour with a fever, the locked front door, and the $50,000 luxury convertible sitting in the driveway with a giant red bow on it. Finally, I told her about my 18th birthday present, the plastic 30-day city bus pass tossed onto the wet porch by my mother. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock in Grandma Lydia's living room hundreds of miles away. "Gabriella told me she was buying you a reliable, safe sedan for your birthday," Grandma Lydia finally said, her voice dropping an octave, losing all of its usual warmth and replacing it with the sharp, calculating tone of the retired accountant she was. "She sent me an invoice for a down payment on a Honda Civic. She said the rest of the monthly allowance I send was going to your advanced design courses and Arya's tutoring." My heart pounded against my ribs. "I haven't taken a design course since sophomore year, Grandma. I couldn't afford it, and Arya doesn't have a tutor. She spends her afternoons at the mall." "I see," Grandma Lydia said softly, though the 2 words carried the weight of a thunderclap. "Riley, listen to me very carefully. I am going to need proof to legally untangle this mess, but I have a distinct advantage. Your mother is arrogant, but she is fundamentally lazy. She relies on you to fix the house Wi-Fi and manage the family computers, correct?" "Yes," I confirmed. "I set up their entire home network." "That is your leverage," Grandma Lydia instructed, her voice turning crisp and strategic. Gabriella has been forwarding me heavily redacted bank statements for the past 3 years to justify the educational allowance I provide from the revocable trust I established for you girls. I need the unredacted files. I need the credit card statements. And I need to know exactly whose name is on the title of that new convertible. The trap was set. My parents had treated me like unpaid help for so long that they had inadvertently handed me the keys to their destruction. They assumed I was too docile to ever look into the locked drawers or the password-protected folders on the desktop in the home office. They forgot that I was the one who created the passwords. The next morning, the house was dead silent. Gabriella had left early for a property showing, Jacob was at his corporate office, and Arya had sped off in her new convertible the second the sun came up, desperate to flaunt her new toy to her friends. My fever had subsided to a dull ache, replaced by the adrenaline of a ticking clock. I slipped out of my room and walked down the hallway to the home office. The door was shut but unlocked. I stepped inside, the heavy scent of Gabriella's expensive floral perfume still hanging in the air, a sickening reminder of her fake, polished exterior. I sat down at the heavy mahogany desk and woke the computer. The login screen prompted me for a password. Gabriella thought she was clever, using a combination she assumed I would never guess. I typed in Arya Star Real Estate 1 and hit enter. The screen unlocked instantly. For the next 3 hours, I dug through years of digital deceit. My mother hadn't even bothered to hide the files securely. She had simply buried them in a folder labeled Tax Prep Archive. As I opened PDF after PDF, the sheer scale of their theft made my stomach churn. The generous $5,000 monthly allowance Grandma Lydia had been sending for our education and well-being was being systematically funneled into Gabriella's personal checking account. There were receipts for luxury spa retreats, designer handbags, Jacob's expensive golf club memberships, and thousands of dollars in credit card debt payoffs. And then I found the Holy Grail, the dealership paperwork for Arya's convertible. I pulled out my phone and took clear, high-resolution photographs of every single document. I documented the forged invoices Gabriella had created to send to Grandma Lydia, detailing non-existent tutors and phantom graphic design classes. I screenshotted the car dealership contract, noting with a dark sense of satisfaction that Arya's name was nowhere on the document. The car was leased under Jacob and Gabriella's names, paid for with a massive down payment directly sourced from the trust fund money meant for my college tuition. I bundled all the images into a secure, encrypted folder and emailed them directly to Grandma Lydia. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text message from her. It contained only 3 words, but they were enough to seal my parents' fate. Checkmate. Be ready. The tension in the dining room that evening was thick enough to choke on. Gabriella had insisted on a celebratory family dinner to honor Arya's 16th birthday, ordering expensive takeout from a high-end Italian restaurant downtown. She had plated the food on our fine china, pouring herself and Jacob generous glasses of imported red wine. I sat at the far end of the table, pushing a single piece of ravioli around my plate. The silence was only broken by the clinking of silverware and Arya's endless, boastful chatter. And then, Jessica literally screamed when she saw the leather seats, Arya was saying, scrolling through her phone with one hand while twirling pasta with the other. Everyone in the junior parking lot was taking pictures of it. It's definitely the nicest car at school. You guys are literally the best parents ever. Gabriella beamed, taking a slow sip of her wine. Well, sweetheart, we always said we wanted to reward hard work and potential. We had a very profitable quarter, and your father and I believe in investing in our family's future. Jacob nodded solemnly, reaching over to pat Arya's hand. You deserve it, kiddo, just make sure you keep it washed. I looked up from my plate, my eyes locking onto my mother's polished, arrogant face. The sheer hypocrisy of her words burned in my throat, but I kept my voice perfectly level, deliberately devoid of the usual submissive tone they expected from me. A profitable quarter. I asked casually, leaning back in my chair. Is that what we're calling Grandma Lydia's educational trust fund these days? The clinking of silverware stopped instantly. The silence that fell over the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Arya looked up from her phone, her brow furrowing in confusion. Jacob froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. Gabriella's face went entirely rigid. The warm, tan complexion she prided herself on seemed to drain away, leaving a sickly, ashen pallor in its wake. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice trembling slightly before she forced it into a tone of harsh reprimand. "What kind of disrespectful nonsense are you talking about, Riley?" "I'm just curious, Mom," I continued, folding my hands in my lap. I felt a strange, cold calmness wash over me. I was no longer the neglected daughter begging for a ride in the rain. I was the architect of their unraveling. Because I was looking at the down payment receipt for Arya's convertible today. The $10,000 wire transfer. It's funny, because it perfectly matches the exact amount Grandma Lydia wired to your account last Tuesday for my graphic design college tuition deposit. The one you told her was absolutely necessary to secure my spot at the university. "Shut your mouth," Jacob barked, slamming his fist down on the heavy wooden table so hard the wine glasses rattled dangerously. His face flushed a dark, violent shade of red. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You've been snooping through things that don't belong to you." "I didn't have to snoop very hard, Dad," I replied, my voice steady against his sudden explosion of anger. "You left the tax prep archive folder right on the desktop. I also saw the invoices you mocked up. You know, the fake ones for the Honda Civic you supposedly bought me for my birthday. The one that somehow materialized as a 30-day bus pass." Arya looked back and forth between us, her phone slowly lowering to the table. "Mom, what is she talking about? You said you paid for my car with your commission from the Miller estate." Gabriella scrambled, her eyes darting frantically around the room as if looking for an escape route. "Riley is lying, Arya. She's jealous. She's always been intensely jealous of you, and now she's making up vicious, insane stories to ruin your special day. Grandma Lydia agreed to let us redirect some of the funds for general household expenses. It's perfectly legal." "Redirect?" I echoed, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You forged her signature on the quarterly ledger, Mom, and you didn't just steal my tuition. You've been siphoning the $5,000 a month meant for both of our educations for 3 years. You bought designer bags, Dad's golf trips, and a leased car that isn't even in Arya's name." "It's not in my name," Arya interrupted, her voice pitching up in genuine panic. She looked at our mother. "Mom, you told me the title was in my name." "You're a minor, Arya. Of course it's not in your name." Jacob yelled, losing his temper completely. He stood up, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at me. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. You live under my roof. You eat my food. I will not have you sitting at my table, disrespecting your mother, and spouting these malicious, fabricated lies. If you don't like how this family operates, you can pack your bags and take your little bus pass straight to a homeless shelter." His poorly executed threats didn't scare me anymore. They only confirmed his absolute desperation. I looked at my father, then at my mother, who was now clutching her wine glass so tightly her knuckles were white. "I won't be packing anything tonight, Dad," I said quietly, pushing my chair back and standing up. I looked down at the three of them, finally seeing them for what they were, small, fraudulent, and terrified. "But you might want to start getting your paperwork in order." Because Grandma Lydia doesn't think my stories are fabricated at all. I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving my untouched dinner behind, the sound of my mother's frantic, hyperventilating breaths echoing in my wake. The fallout from the dining room confrontation was immediate and chaotic. Within 20 minutes, I heard the heavy, hurried footsteps of Jacob stomping down the hallway. He threw open the door to the home office, and I listened as he began violently ripping cables from the wall, physically unplugging the desktop computer and carrying the tower out to his car. A few moments later, my phone lost its Wi-Fi connection. Gabriella had frantically logged into the router and changed the network passwords, effectively trying to cut off my communication with the outside world. She paced the living room for hours, making hushed, panicked phone calls, her voice occasionally rising in shrill defense as she spoke to what I could only assume were her banking contacts or perhaps even a lawyer. They thought confiscating the hardware and blocking the internet would stop me. They didn't realize that the encrypted files were already sitting safely in Grandma Lydia's inbox, and my cell phone still had a perfect data connection. Their desperate attempts to regain control were like trying to plug a bursting dam with a single piece of tape. The next afternoon, while my parents were out trying to secure a sudden loan to cover the missing trust funds, I found Arya sitting on the edge of the driveway. The bright red bow had been discarded in the garage, and she was staring blankly at the white convertible. The usual arrogant swagger she carried was entirely gone, replaced by a tense, nervous energy. I walked out and stood a few feet away from her. She didn't look at me, but she didn't tell me to go away either. "They're going to take my phone next, you know," Arya said quietly, her voice devoid of its usual mocking tone. She picked at a loose thread on her designer jeans. "Mom came into my room last night crying. She said you were trying to destroy the family. She said you contacted Grandma and filled her head with lies because you're bitter." "Do you really believe that, Arya?" I asked, keeping my distance. "Look at how they're acting. Dad practically dismantled the office." "Mom is terrified. Do innocent people act like that?" Arya crossed her arms tightly over her chest, a defensive posture. "They bought me the car. They wanted me to be happy. You're just trying to take it away because you got a bus pass. Mom said she has the paperwork to prove Grandma approved the household spending." I sighed, pulling my phone from my pocket. I knew Arya was struggling. For 16 years, she had been the golden child, insulated from the reality of our parents' financial manipulations. Recognizing that her entire privileged existence was built on theft from her own sister, no less, was a bitter pill she was actively resisting. "I'm not trying to take your car, Arya," I said softly, "but you need to see the truth, not what Mom tells you." The actual, irrefutable truth. I opened the secure folder on my phone and walked over, holding the screen out to her. I didn't show her my missing tuition receipts. I knew she wouldn't care enough about those to break her loyalty. Instead, I pulled up a different file I had uncovered during my deep dive into the archives. "Look at this," I instructed. Arya reluctantly leaned in. It was a scanned document from 3 years ago. It was a withdrawal slip from a savings account. "That's my account," Arya whispered, her eyes widening as she read the account number. It was the college savings account Grandma Lydia had specifically set up for Arya when she was born, separate from the monthly educational allowance. "Look at the amount and look at the signature," I pointed out. The withdrawal was for $22,000, the entirety of the account. The signature at the bottom read Lydia Vance, but the handwriting was unmistakably Gabriella's loopy, dramatic script. "Mom forged Grandma's signature and emptied your college fund 3 years ago, Arya," I explained, my voice steady, letting the reality of the document sink in. "I found the corresponding deposit slip. She used your entire savings to pay off 2 massive credit card bills, and to fund that 2-week networking retreat she and Dad took to the Bahamas. Grandma's monthly allowance. That's what they've been using to keep up appearances and buy your silence ever since." Arya's hands began to shake as she stared at the screen. The defensive wall she had built around her parents began to fracture, the undeniable proof staring her right in the face. "They wouldn't," she started to say, but the words died in her throat. She looked at the white convertible, the symbol of her parents' supposed love, and the realization finally hit her. It wasn't a gift. It was a bribe purchased with stolen money to keep her blind to their fraud. Before Arya could process the magnitude of the betrayal, the sound of tires crunching on gravel shattered the quiet afternoon. A sleek, black town car pulled smoothly into our driveway, parking directly behind the leased convertible, blocking it in completely. The driver's side door opened, and a man in a sharp suit stepped out, moving to open the rear passenger door. A sleek, silver-headed woman stepped out into the afternoon sun, carrying a leather briefcase. She adjusted her designer sunglasses and looked up at the house, her expression carved from absolute ice. Grandma Lydia had arrived, and she had brought her lawyer. Grandma Lydia did not knock. She simply opened the heavy oak front door and stepped into the foyer, the sharp click of her heels echoing through the house. The lawyer followed closely behind, shutting the door with a quiet, terrifying finality. I walked in right behind them, with Arya trailing slowly, her face pale and her hands still trembling from the revelation in the driveway. As if orchestrated by some cruel, cosmic sense of irony, Gabriella and Jacob were not alone in the house. To fully capitalize on the facade of their wealth and Arya's birthday weekend, Gabriella had invited her managing broker, a woman named Cynthia, and two high-net-worth prospective clients over for afternoon cocktails. They were all gathered in our expansive living room, sipping champagne. When Gabriella saw her mother walk in, accompanied by a man in a bespoke suit, the fake, dazzling smile she had plastered on for her clients instantly faltered. "Mother?" Gabriella asked, her voice tight, quickly setting her champagne flute down on the glass coffee table. "What on earth are you doing here? We weren't expecting you." "I'm sure you weren't, Gabriella," Grandma Lydia said, her voice cutting through the soft jazz playing on the stereo like a blade. She didn't offer a hug or even a polite nod to the guests. She walked straight to the center of the room. "And I am not here for a social visit. This is Mr. Sterling. He is my legal counsel." Jacob stood up from his leather armchair, puffing out his chest in a desperate attempt to assert control in front of the strangers. "Lydia, this is highly inappropriate. We have company. Whatever this is, it can wait until Cynthia and the Hendersons leave." "No, Jacob, it absolutely cannot," I said, stepping out from behind Grandma Lydia. The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Cynthia cleared her throat, clearly sensing the impending disaster. "Gabriella, maybe we should go." "Stay exactly where you are," Grandma Lydia commanded, her tone brokering absolutely no argument. She looked at Gabriella's broker. "If you are doing business with my daughter, Cynthia, I highly suggest you listen to what is about to be said. It concerns her financial integrity, or rather, the complete lack thereof." Gabriella's face turned the color of chalk. "Riley, what have you done?" she hissed, the mask completely slipping to reveal the panicked, vicious woman underneath. "I told you to stop spreading your jealous lies." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough all on its own. I walked over to the smart TV mounted on the wall, pulled out my phone, and connected to the screen casting feature. Within seconds, the 60-inch display lit up with the high-resolution images of the documents I had secured. "I'm not spreading lies, Mom," I said calmly, looking her dead in the eye. "I'm just sharing the tax prep archives you were too arrogant to encrypt." I swiped on my phone, and the first document appeared on the screen, the forged quarterly ledger. "For the past 3 years," I announced to the dead silent room, "my parents have been receiving $5,000 a month from my grandmother's revocable trust. It was explicitly earmarked for my college tuition, my advanced design courses, and my sister's tutoring. Not a single cent of it went to our education." "That is a complete fabrication," Jacob bellowed, stepping toward me, his fists clenched. "Turn that television off right now, Riley. You are humiliating this family." "Mr. Sterling, the lawyer, stepped smoothly into Jacob's path. "I strongly advise you to lower your voice and keep your distance, sir," he said in a quiet, chillingly polite tone. "My firm has already verified the authenticity of these wire transfers." I swiped again. The screen changed to the credit card payoff statements and the receipts for Gabriella's luxury spa retreats. The dates matched the trust fund deposits perfectly. I heard one of the prospective clients gasp softly. Cynthia, the broker, was staring at the screen in open-mouthed horror. "They used the money to fund this fake lifestyle," I continued, my voice steady, feeling years of oppression lifting from my shoulders with every word. "They stole my future to buy designer bags and country club memberships. And yesterday, they handed me a 30-day city bus pass for my 18th birthday, while simultaneously doing this." I swiped to the final, most devastating piece of evidence. the dealership contract for the white convertible sitting in the driveway, and right next to it, the withdrawal slip from Arya's college savings account with the forged signature. "They didn't buy that car with real estate commissions," I stated, the words ringing out in the cavernous room. "They leased it under their own names, using the last of the trust fund money for the down payment. And 3 years ago, my mother forged Grandma's signature and emptied my sister's entire college savings account to pay off her personal debts." Gabriella began to hyperventilate. She reached out, grasping the back of the sofa to steady herself. "It was a loan. I was going to put it back. The market was slow, we just needed to float some expenses." "You stole from your own children, Gabriella," Grandma Lydia interrupted, her voice shaking with a rage that was terrifying in its absolute control. "You used my granddaughter as an unpaid servant, denied her an education, and then you stole the funds I specifically provided to protect her. You are a fraud." The silence that followed was deafening. Gabriella looked around frantically, searching for an ally. She looked at Cynthia, but the broker was already picking up her purse, her expression one of utter disgust. She looked at Jacob, but he had slumped back into his chair, defeated by the sheer volume of undeniable proof. Finally, Gabriella looked at Arya. "Arya, sweetie, please, you know how much we love you. We wanted you to have the best birthday." Arya stepped forward. She looked completely different from the spoiled, arrogant girl who had mocked me through my bedroom door the night before. She looked broken, but her eyes were remarkably clear. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the heavy, expensive set of keys to the convertible, and looked directly at our mother. "You didn't buy that for me," Arya said, her voice cracking but resolute. "You bought it to hide what you did to my college fund. You bought it so I wouldn't see how horrible you were treating Riley." With a sudden, violent motion, Arya threw the keys across the room. They hit the glass coffee table with a loud, shattering crack, sending a spiderweb of fractures through the expensive surface. "I don't want your fake car," Arya cried, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She walked across the room, completely ignoring our stunned parents, and stood firmly right next to me and Grandma Lydia. "I'm leaving with them." The downfall of Gabriella and Jacob was swift, merciless, and absolute. Mr. Sterling did not leave the house that afternoon until he had handed my parents a thick folder of legal demands. Grandma Lydia gave them 2 choices. They could voluntarily liquidate their assets, including the house and Jacob's retirement accounts, to fully repay the stolen trust funds and Arya's college account, or Mr. Sterling would turn the entire mountain of evidence over to the authorities and press formal charges for wire fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. Faced with the terrifying prospect of prison time, their arrogance completely evaporated. They chose to liquidate. Within a week, the luxury convertible was repossessed by the dealership due to breach of contract. The house was listed for a rapid, below-market value sale. Cynthia, horrified by the public exposure of Gabriella's lack of ethics, immediately terminated my mother's contract with the real estate brokerage, ensuring she would struggle to ever work in the local industry again. The polished, wealthy facade they had sacrificed their children to maintain was reduced to a pile of unpaid bills and legal notices. Arya and I did not stick around to watch the final moving trucks arrive. The very same day of the confrontation, we packed our bags and left with Grandma Lydia, driving back to her quiet, peaceful home in the neighboring state. For the first few days, the transition was difficult. Arya was grieving the complete destruction of her reality. She spent hours in her new room, crying. But one evening, as I was sitting on Grandma Lydia's back porch sketching on my iPad, the screen door creaked open. Arya walked out, wrapping a heavy cardigan around herself, and sat down on the wicker chair next to me. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the crickets. "I'm sorry," Arya whispered, her voice barely audible over the night breeze. She didn't look at me, keeping her eyes fixed on the wooden floorboards. "I was horrible to you, Riley, for years. I let them treat you like a maid, and I joined in because it made me feel special. I was so stupid." I stopped sketching and looked at my younger sister. Without the designer clothes and the arrogant smirk, she just looked like a scared, lost teenager who had been manipulated by the two people who were supposed to protect her. "You were a kid, Arya," I said softly, reaching over and placing my hand over hers. "Mom and Dad built a toxic environment, and they pitted us against each other to distract us from what they were doing. I'm angry about the past, but I don't hate you. We're out now. That's what matters." Arya looked up, her eyes swimming with fresh tears, and nodded. She squeezed my hand tightly. In that small, quiet moment, years of artificially manufactured rivalry washed away, leaving the foundation for a real sisterhood to finally begin. A month later, on a crisp, bright Tuesday morning, Grandma Lydia called me down to the kitchen. Mr. Sterling was sitting at the breakfast nook, sipping a cup of black coffee. "Good morning, Riley," Grandma Lydia said, her eyes twinkling with a warmth I hadn't seen in years. She slid a thick, bound document across the granite counter toward me. "Mr. Sterling and I have been finalizing some paperwork." I looked at the document. It was a newly established, ironclad trust fund. My name was the only one on it. "The funds your parents are legally required to pay back will be deposited here," Mr. Sterling explained in his calm, professional voice. "Additionally, your grandmother has supplemented the account. Your tuition for your graphic design program is fully covered, as are your living expenses for the next 4 years. Your parents will never have access to a single dime of it." I stared at the numbers on the page, my vision blurring. For the first time in my entire life, my chest felt completely light. The constant, suffocating weight of financial panic and survival was simply gone. "Thank you," I choked out, wiping a tear from my cheek. "Grandma, I don't even know how to." "You don't need to thank me, sweetheart," Grandma Lydia smiled gently. "But there is one more thing. Come outside." I followed her through the front door, stepping out into the morning sunlight. Parked in the driveway, completely devoid of any ridiculous red bows, was a beautiful, deep blue, late-model sedan. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't a luxury convertible, but it was sturdy, reliable, and perfectly maintained. Grandma Lydia held out a single silver key. "It's fully paid off," she said, her smile widening into a grin. "The title is in your name, Riley. No one can ever take it from you. You won't be needing that bus pass anymore." I took the key, feeling the cool metal press into my palm. I looked at the car, then back at my grandmother, and finally I let out a laugh, a real, genuine laugh that echoed down the quiet street. The next few months were a blur of positive motion. I enrolled in the top graphic design program in the state, completely unburdened by debt. Arya transferred to a new high school, stripped of her toxic friend group, and actually started studying, working part-time to rebuild the savings our mother had stolen. We heard through the grapevine that Gabriella and Jacob had moved into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of the city, drowning in legal fees and social exile. They had tried to bury me in the shadows, hoping I would quietly accept the crumbs they threw my way. But they had underestimated my resilience. Standing in my new college campus courtyard, holding my textbooks and looking forward to a future I had built with my own 2 hands, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I had sprung the trap, I had broken the chains, and for the first time in my life, the road ahead was entirely my own.